So, Amanda, I have to ask you this question, please indulge me. The ADHD crisis you talk about moving from masking to unconditional self-love. I know how much of your heart you've poured into this book. I know how much effort you've put into this book. If there is one woman leader watching you right now who feels like her brain is her worst enemy, who feels like the world is crashing before her, you understand? What is the
Yes.
thing you want her to know about her self-worth?
Well, I think self-worth has to start with really understanding who you are
Mm.
and, really getting to understand if you are ADHD, how that shows up in your life, how that affects you, and who you are, right? Because getting to understand who you are really, really helps with a lot of the masking, right? Masking in ADHD comes from a world that expects neurotypical behavior, a world that has a set of rules.
Mm.
And so, especially in women, we mask more than our ADHD male components. We really want to fit in. We want to be accepted. We want to be connected. But it takes an extreme amount of mental load for an ADHD woman to hold up this mask of neurotypical behavior and expectations. And I think when we start to understand and acknowledge our neurodivergence and we start to go, okay, wow, wait, that even, little things like, do you know ADHD women at the end of the night cannot stand to take off their makeup? And you're like, whoa, even like taking makeup off at the end of the night is a big task for somebody that has ADHD. And it's hilarious to like have these little comments. One of my daughters had walked into my room about a few hours earlier and had said, Mom, I just can't stand wearing makeup. I hate putting on makeup because at the end of the night I have to take it off. And then I hear this fact and it was just like comic timing. And so when we start to really, really understand how ADHD is showing up, impacting our lives, right? And in leadership, the masking is not only exhausting, it kind of leads to this idea of imposter syndrome. Like, this doesn't feel authentic. This doesn't feel like me. This doesn't feel like I'm in my own energy, and it's exhausting. And then when you start to just go, oh, wow, like, oh, this is ADHD. Like, I could change my leadership plan. I could reach out to the group I'm working with and I could be like, hey, y'all, I have a special brain and it works in a special way. And so just humor me as I introduce my brain and how it works to you. And so when we have meetings, this is how it's going to look like. I need my ideas written on the board, and I might jump from one topic to another topic. And if it's hard on you, raise your hand. Let's communicate. I want to give you that space for your neurotypicalness to have room in the meeting and in the space. But I also have to create space for me and the neurodivergent group that's showing up here. So it's coming into your own ownership of what your challenges are, but also what your gifts are. And when you understand your gifts, you can effectively move out of the masking and into your brilliance. And I think it's an essential part of growing into an ADHD leader. It's a fantastic part, but it is about A, becoming self-aware, and then B, falling in love with that part of you that is fully ADHD and brilliant and doing wonderful things in this world.
Thank you so much for that answer, Amanda. Really appreciate. Now, the second question I have for you, please, is that you asked a question that stopped me in my tracks. Now, I
Mhm.
put that question back to you. Yes, please. And that question is, why do I do the things I do not want to do and not do the things that I do want?
Mhm.
Can you please throw more light on that?
Yes. Yeah, so that question actually predates my work with ADHD. And it is the question I asked myself for another book project that I'm working on that should be finished at the end of April, early May. And then we'll start the whole publishing editing process and hopefully we'll be out early next year. And that book is called The Trauma Trap, Healing the Trust Divide. So I got that question. I actually found it in the Bible, Romans 7:15, and it just kept on coming back and coming back and coming back. And, there are two answers for it, and I think the answers are connected. There's the Christian answer, which is, oh, this is just sin, which is one direction, but like from a psychological lens, what is that? And the short answer is that's trauma. The short answer is that is trauma. What is getting in our way? And so then again, this book project has gone into like what? How do we understand this? And so I started trying to ask that question. I don't know how deep you want me to go into it, but I started creating a model to kind of understand human behavior. And while my thoughts, I'm the stubborn person that has to go through it over and over and figure it out myself. And then at the end, I go, oh, this isn't new thinking. Other people have come to these same conclusions in their different models. But for me, I started with a line and started noticing some behavior over here, hyper codependent, needing a lot of attention, having very poor impulse control, having no boundaries to stop people from, coming in, and no boundaries to stop myself from expressing or overdoing and not saying no enough. And then it goes over here to, another personality type, which would be this hypo aroused, someone who's just very shut down. Walls are super thick, and they don't have boundaries either. They have like walls, like solid steel walls where they're not able to feel and not able to have emotions, and they're not connecting. And so I started really describing these two parts, and then I started talking to myself about, well, what would healthy behavior look like? And so this triangle kind of became this triangle. There's two triangles. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a top triangle and then a bottom triangle. And so this top triangle is this self energy, and it's healthy, and so up here is spirituality, down here is religion, right? Up here is relationship, down here is rules, and up here is surrendering your power to a higher power, and down here is the need to control. And the reason we need to control is up here is safety, and down here is this space where we're not safe. Our trust has been broken. And so this is a trapezoid. I don't know if you can see it. And it became the trauma trap. And so up here is this self energy, this healing power, and down here is this really struggling energy. And so I had it very defined, left to right and top to bottom. And then I think in 2022 or 2023, I went to Bessel van der Kolk's trauma conference in Boston. He has a big annual trauma conference, and people come from all over the place, and it's online, and all over the world people are watching. And the very first speaker that year was Dick Schwartz. And Dick Schwartz is the founder of Internal Family Systems Therapy. And he walked up to the podium. He asked one question, and like literally in my head, I was like, oh my gosh, my model's finished. And so, the triangle really talks about really a lot of attachment therapy. We're talking about secure attachment. We're talking about anxious attachment. We're talking about avoidant attachment, right? But the problem that I was having is people were all over this triangle. And Dick Schwartz stepped up to the podium, and his first question to everybody, a room full of therapists, is, how many of you have multiple personalities? And as a therapist, our first thought is, I don't have multiple personality disorder. And he's like, that's not the question I asked. He said, how many of you have multiple personalities? And it was like, oh my God, all of us do. And so it kind of just really solidified this whole model, right? You've got this healthy different parts up here that show up, and then in different places in our life we have these different little children that have been wounded over here, and then they have these protective parts that are trying to kind of make things right. And so that was the beginning of the trauma trap, and trying to understand what it was. And if you're falling below the line, it's this broken trust, it's this trauma. And these parts are always kind of butting in, and from a subconscious place, and trying to fix things and make things right. And they make a mess of things. They really make, their intentions are so beautiful, but they make a mess of things. And that was the answer to that question. And so then the rest of the book kind of goes into how to rebuild trust, how to understand those parts, how to forgive those trauma parts, how to grow self energy so that, triangle gets bigger and the trauma gets less. And I mean, we're probably always going to have some form of trauma that we're like sneaking up on us at any point as long as we're breathing. But at least we kind of get to understand how these trauma parts are showing up and know how to heal them and know how to teach them to regulate. There's a little caveat to this that I've learned through the process, so this is regulated energy and this is dysregulated energy. And we know that ADHDers dysregulate more than the neurotypical population. But we also have to understand the dysregulation comes from trauma, but with ADHD, it also comes from overstimulation because we don't have these filters that stop all this sensory information from coming in. And so we have this other kind of factor that causes us to dysregulate that isn't related to trauma, but it feels a whole lot like trauma. And so it's a whole nother level of healing and work that the person with ADHD has to do. Our whole triangle, every part of it is ADHD, every part. So up here and down here, we have the ADHD. And so it becomes a little more complicated and challenging for ADHDers, but it is still the same understanding about these trauma parts that really come in and they're so loving, so compassionate. They so want to help us heal. They are our biggest fans and they cause us to trip all the time.
Thank you again. Thank you. Thank you for that answer, Amanda. Thank you.